Good comes it in the bed.
Okay, welcome everybody. We are live streaming now. This workshop, I just want to start with the apologies. We've got Alex, Tom, and Trish is just going to be a minor apology for having to go away briefly.
Thank you.
This workshop will be live streamed in accordance with the principles of open and transparent decision making. It is accepted that councillors will have their own views on many matters, and in many cases might already have views on what the right answer to an issue is. You're not required to approach every decision as though you have given it no prior thought or have no existing knowledge or opinion. However, you are required to keep an open mind, and you must be prepared to change or adjust your views in the evidence or arguments, if the evidence or arguments warrant it. Okay, I'm going to pass over to Rhiannon now, and she's going to start proceedings.
Kia ora, councillors. So this is the first of our activity workshops now as we move into the finalisation stage for the LTP. So this workshop's really an opportunity to hear from the roading, solid waste, property and passenger transport activities this morning. We will reschedule regulatory services, so for a later day. As you're listening to the presentation that the managers give you, be considering what questions that you might have in terms of areas of change that they're proposing. They will be running through areas where they recommend changes required as a result of regulatory or compliance requirements changing, as well as options that you've already asked them to bring forward for your consideration, and other areas where they feel that the change may be required. I'll just remind you that there are notes in your resource centre based on the community feedback that we've had through the pre-engagement. So these have been kind of divided up by activity to make it easier for you to reference some of the things that were raised during that community engagement. Of course, that's not a completely scientific process, as many comments go across different activities, but hopefully that's a useful resource for you. And just one final point to note, obviously this is early in the activity and asset planning stage, so the numbers that officers will be presenting are still a guide at this point. So as we move closer towards budgeting finalisation at the end of the year, those numbers will firm up. So it's important to be aware, both for councillors and those watching live stream, that this is very much a work in progress. That's the point of these workshops. So on that note, I think, Chair, we're ready for the discussion of the roading activity.
Okay, and note the timetable is slightly adjusted now to the previous council meeting. So welcome Leslie and Russell.
Kia ora, good morning councillors and Mianobi. This is the roading presentation for our asset planning process. Leslie has been working pretty hard on this and will be doing most of the presentation. So I guess one of the things that we see is that our works are reasonably well connected to Waka Kotahi and our subsidy. So we're running, I guess, a couple of processes. One, we're trying to explain where we think this will go, but we've also got another process where we also need to bid inside their, I guess, process as well. So this is really an opportunity for us to bring back those ideas, bringing up speed with where our thinking is, and certainly towards the end of the presentation we've got some ideas and, I guess, direction which we will be happy to get some feedback on the way past. So over to Leslie.
Kia ora, councillors, Marinabi. So the overview of our activity is our primary reason for being is for safe and connected and accessible transport system for our city. So we look after the roads, footpaths, street lights, traffic signals, bridges and other structures, and any drainage within the road corridors. We also look after complete network planning and any capital projects to do with safety and encouraging active transport and reducing carbon emissions through our activity. We work closely with SDC and GDC on a road safety Southland platform, and we tie really closely with them on this. And we also work really closely with Waka Kotahi NZTA Environment Southland, especially on the strategic transport planning piece. So from a national context, we have a new minister, David Parker, in the Ministry of Transport, and we bid through this land transport GPS for budget through the National Land Transport Programme. The National Land Transport Fund is allocated through the GPS. So they also control other funding potential, like the CERF fund being the Climate Emergency Response Fund, and provide direction for Crown on the funding. So this is, the LTP also aligns with the NLTP, and we put our funding through for Waka Kotahi for a 3 to 10 year period also through this process. Prior to Cyclone Gabrielle, focus of the GPS was guided towards the reduction of emissions, and that was going to be their focus and their core consideration for all decisions. But since Cyclone Gabrielle, they've put a pause on the GPS, and they have mildly indicated that there'll be a greater focus on reconstruction of damaged infrastructure and building back better resilience. Then if we come down one level to a strategic context, Arataki Mirahiku, it's Waka Kotahi's regional direction for Mirahiku Southland, and this was redeveloped in March 2023. And what they're saying up there is that we've got good capacity in our existing network, and there's opportunities within our transport system to increase rail freight opportunities. We have a very high reliance in Southland on private vehicles, and we have below average participation in walking and cycling. They're encouraging us to move into active modes of transport, and our primary goal for these guys is to reduce vehicle kilometres travelled within our network to help reduce carbon emissions. Part of our network is susceptible to flooding and erosion, but this is probably more indicative on the Waka Kotahi network within our region, Bluff Highway being one piece of the network that is susceptible to these threats. So focus on a low carbon economy, our interregional connections with SDC, GDC, and our ability to improve road safety and reduce pollutants. Moving to a multimodal freight system, moving away from road towards rail, and implementing road safety plans and programs is a real focus for Arataki Mirahiku. Our local context is that we have a large number of fatalities on our network in comparison to others, and that we have modal conflict in our network, being freight, cycling, private use vehicles. We have increasing customer expectations, and we have increasing expectations from our funders on proving investment decisions, etc.
So I guess we might just pause, as we've thrown lots of acronyms at you on the way past. So we're happy to either gather some questions up at the end, or if there is something you wanted to talk, but let's just run, I guess, through the strategic piece, how we link our council to Waka Kotahi and the funding. So it's really us trying to merge the government's priorities and the council's priorities together to get that funding.
Yeah, so just interested in the particular reference to rail. Has there been any feedback sought from industry around the logistics of actually enacting that and the cost related to that? Because it might be a fairy tale idea that we want to put more freight on rail, but the reality is, because of the way our roading system and our system works around how we logistically move goods around our country, the best way forward is road. And then if you look at the development, so I'm not sure that you're aware, but there's a Fonterra truck that's travelling every day from Edendale to Clandeboy, fueled by hydrogen. So, you know, that space is moving very, very rapidly. So I challenge the view that there's going to be more freight and more use of non-roading services, and how that might drive a decision really concerns me. And other point I'd point to, I know that the railway line between here and Ojai was $30 million was spent, and to my knowledge, the only thing that goes down there is coal, and we reference a carbon neutral environment. So, you know, our ideology and our reality around investment seem very confused at a national level.
Mr. Chair, yes, there's a couple of things there. That what we do know is that Kiwi Rail now have to seek funding from the National Land Transport Program, which is, and I guess it's funded nationally. There are South Island freight studies to try to identify where the freight opportunities are, and Kiwi Rail are invited to the regional transport committees to actually be able to participate at that regional level. I understand what you're saying is there are competing challenges at a national level, but I guess that's the messaging that we should continue to feed into the GPS when it comes out for public or for council's input as well. So,
sorry, secondary. Just, so has industry been consulted? So the main freights, some of our large transport things that aren't Kiwi Rail, have they had active input into developing the strategy?
yes, there is a South Island freight study that's been undertaken that has actually consulted with the big trucking firms.
It has.
Coastal shipping being factored in at all?
Coastal shipping is one of those. I guess the port is part of the. I guess that at that strategic level, that's actually, I guess, the domain of the regional council to actually manage the strategic level across the whole province. But yes, it's one of those. I guess another area that we see as potentially going forward as potential, but we don't necessarily influence it too much. But it's how we access goods to and from our community, which is, I guess, our biggest challenge.
Barry, then Evelyn.
Yeah, can you give us some sort of update on the road between Invercargill and Bluff with the low-lying areas of it?
It's a good question, but a difficult one. My understanding, it's a road that's managed by Wakakatahi. So I have heard at a recent meeting where there has been a bid put forward by the team at Wakakatahi across the whole country for funding for doing some resilience works. And my understanding is that's on that program, but whether or not that's been awarded to that road or not. So I haven't got a definitive answer, but I know they've highlighted sections of the road as being relatively low-lying and are looking to make some improvements, but I'm unsure whether that's been funded. But that's not necessarily council funding, that's government funding.
It's always in the same places, though, like literally where the road rips up.
Yeah, that's where it flood.
Evelyn.
So I'm glad somebody else asked about coastal shipping. I see that as part of the energy resilience and climate change use, that they are actually promoting more use of sea transport for goods. Does that, therefore, the corollary of that is that more containers, therefore more need for rail? Or are we going to see more containers go on the back of trucks? Because that's, for me, is perhaps not necessarily a forward-looking move. However, firstly, Russell, do you have some sort of indicator of what that means?
I think the challenge that we have is how do we actually manage with the increased freight movements going forward, given that we've got some greenhouse emissions type targets to meet, and somewhere in there is actually the use of all of these things. How do we actually use different fuels? How do we use different modes? But I guess that's the future challenge. But that's across all of those things is the context that we operate and need to develop our plan for Invercargill City around. So I guess we need to say, how do we actually allow for more of all of those things and actually tie it into our community? So that's just, I guess, the high level strategic. But perhaps we might just carry on and take us where our plan's going to.
The second part, because it's the safety part. I've expressed this concern before, is the increasing heavy traffic on the Macquarie Street, Scott Street, and how well equipped our community is to understand that. Because until I lived down there, I don't think I really understood it either. That it is not that little rural road that it used to be, that it's actually quite a major heavy traffic transport area. And who makes those sorts of decisions and how much control the city has over those?
It's a beautiful segue into the next section, which Leslie's going to talk about our network frameworks
Rightio,
and how roads are done. Just to keep going, because otherwise Rhiannon will look at me and glare.
No, I'm getting kicked. Yeah.
So Wakakotahi used to have the ONRC, the One Network Road Classification, and they are moving into what's now called the One Network Framework. So this new framework doesn't just consider traffic movements, but also considers people in place within the hierarchy of roads. So it gets movement of traffic versus people in place and how to operate those spaces in different levels of service for our community. So that we're all so that we're all speaking at the same language when we're going up for bidding for our programs. For an example, Esk and Don Street would be considered main streets within this new One Network Framework.
And perhaps very quickly to answer Evelyn's question is that council has the ability to actually manage its network classification for a street. It also has powers under bylaws if it wishes to restrict access. But in principle, every vehicle is equal. We want some streets to have different types of vehicles. But once again, we've got the freight movement against the people movement. So there are streets where we would say you shouldn't go down there, and we certainly restrict the heavy vehicles, but we do end up with some trucks using specific roads that perhaps they haven't in the past because destinations end. But we have a grid network, so we actually have to have an efficient network as well to make sure our community is well serviced by those, because otherwise the cost of our goods will increase if we make it too difficult.
So we're working into the future for the network planning, as Russell just described, and this will inform district plans and long-term plans, etc., moving forward, and be informed equally by those.
Can I just jump in, Russell, and ask just for Wakakotahi funding now? The funding is from fuel tax, road users tax, and that's about it, isn't it?
Mr. Chair, it is a hypothecated fund, so every dollar that we put in through fuel taxes and road user licensing gets put into the national pool. Whether that's sufficient to actually meet the demands of the whole country is the challenge, and certainly the EV challenge is something that will, I guess, be addressed in time, as I think it was that the EVs weren't going to be charged until they're 5% of the total vehicles in New Zealand. I guess we might be approaching that, so there will be a change somewhere and I know it's being considered about how you might gain enough revenue to pay for roading, I suppose, is the challenge that we have. But
yeah, just that since I've been on council, those roading forums that we go to provincially, the funding hasn't been there for the last 10 years. So I'm just wondering when part of the tax dollar, your collection by government is going to actually come back. Because what I'm seeing is that the vehicles are spending more time on the road with their engines going because it's taking longer to get somewhere. And if they were able to get there because of lack of congestion, you wouldn't have that problem.
It's the dilemma that we face is how do we pay for what we want? Yeah. And I guess as we get through this presentation, we've got a number of slides at the end where we're putting up options that you may wish to consider. You always have the choice to fully pay for it as the community, or you have the option to actually bid as part of a National Land Transport Program and get some subsidy on it, which is a good investment. However, you still can decide to pay for it fully as council. There's no reason why you couldn't if you wish to invest, but it costs you twice as much.
Okay, thanks.
So just to give an overview of what our current assets are like in comparison to the national and our regional partners. So these roads have now been divided up into the new One Network Framework categories, and our smooth travelled exposure is either consistent or better than the national average across our network.
Invercargill's green.
Yes, sorry. And our current activity for peak roughness is also either at the same standard as national or better for roughness on our road corridors. In Wakako Tahi's eyes, we don't necessarily have a problem with our roads themselves. But then when you get to our collective risk, it does point to a very different picture in that we have deaths and serious injuries per kilometre are quite bad on our rural roads, our local streets and our activity streets. So this is a point of focus for us moving forward. This is also the Community at Risk Register that's done every year, and this is the latest one in 2022, where unfortunately we come out worst on all intersections nationally for our road controlling authority. So that is a focus of our investment planning moving forward.
So being number one is the worst place to be out of 67, and it's done from a statistical basis across New Zealand and uses standard deviation. So when you're actually in a red zone like we are, that's showing that we are statistically quite different from the rest of the country, and is quite a sobering result. We've been in all intersections in some of those vulnerable and areas being consistently for, unfortunately, a reasonably long period of time, as being quite, we stand out, unfortunately, from the rest of the country. So we do have a safety problem in our community.
Right, Ria, then Evelyn.
Just a couple of questions, just for the interest of everyone around this table. What is the cost to us per death per kilometre?
I don't have that on me, I'm sorry, Rita.
No, that's okay.
It's a reasonably big number. My recollection is it's about $3 to $4 million or something. I can't quite remember it, but that's a fatality cost.
I wanted to point that out because, you know, this is actually quite serious. The other area, like with our intersection mortalities, we are, as a council, collectively already putting, aren't we, good, what would I say, measures, conditions to try and lower that, because we've got our safety program, which has been recognised as...
We're certainly working very hard on actually looking to identify and address situations. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we do strike is that often, because it's nationalised, you divide the number of crashes by your vehicle kilometres travelled. So Auckland will have a lot more in number, but a lot more kilometres travelled. So I guess it's part of that, but it does actually reflect. I guess the way they've done it is to highlight, so you can focus your programs into those areas, and that is what we have been and continue to do.
Evelyn.
So my question was fairly similar, and Russell has in part answered it. It's not based on population though. You're saying it's based on amount of kilometres per year. I wonder about the risk of distortion using that sort of modelling, given that we're a relatively small population and potentially perceived as low kilometres travelled, that one crash, one fatality becomes disproportionately magnified. And I don't mean to belittle the fatality. I mean, one amongst a population of 50,000 is much greater impact than in the whole population of Auckland. And does that make it seem worse? I seriously don't mean to diminish what our responsibility is or anything else, but how much weighting do you give the way these statistics look?
Mr. Chair, we use this as to really to keep our mind sharp about safety is one of our key things that we do. It's not that we don't, we continue to focus and look at our intersections as areas where our programs are developed, and look to actually solve some of those. A number of our crashes that we see are relatively random, and there's no pattern to what we see. So sometimes we're chasing lightning a little bit, but it just continues to remind us that some of the driver behaviour we see in and around our community, the way our network's set up, where we need to invest is actually really key to our future roading and transport networks going forward. So that's the real message that we're getting today, is that safety is one of the key things that we have. And when we've been looking at what our big problems are, safety is what it comes out as our number one problem, and we need to continue to ask whenever we invest, does it improve our safety?
Alan.
Yeah, can you just quickly clarify to me again, our rank? So we are the worst for all intersections out of how many? 67, do you say?
67 councils.
So we're not 67th. We're not the best at anything. We're sort of a bit average, is what you're saying there.
No, that seems to be a strange way to do it. They've that's the number one is the worst.
It's a wee bit because when you say like cyclists involved, we're the fifth. You see now, are they country, like rural sort of related or town related? Because that would make a difference too. Without bridges on the sides, rural roads and things. I mean,
this
need to break down even a wee bit further than that.
This is a high level. We have lots of data about that and lots of time spent analysing these things specifically, both ours and across other networks. But I guess if you just left you with that thought that says these are the vulnerable points in our community, and Alan's right, the cyclists show that we do have a disproportionately higher number of crashes that involve a cyclist for some reason in our community somewhere.
Same with intersections, and that's not just a really question. It's same with intersections. You've got sort of semi-rural intersections, and I know one very particularly bad one that has had fatalities, yet nothing's been done on the corner, and I know that you guys have just recently been made aware of it again. That's the one out at Morris Bush, of course. Now that's an intersection, of course, that someone is going to die there again soon. So you got all intersections there. So is it town intersections or is it the rural intersections? Because obviously you got these crossroads in the rural community that people don't ignore or seem to not see signs.
We have data, and we analyse it continuously to look for trends and to try to identify where we might be next. I guess once again I come back to this is really just highlights. This is our focus. Our focus is about safety. Our focus going forward has to be about improving safety and addressing those places that we know of and can improve with the appropriate time and treatments.
Nobby.
Yeah, just two quick reflections. Certainly the over 75s, and given that we've got some councillors heading that way, I guess one of the factors that kicks in is that some of the comparisons we have with other cities have public transport that we don't have. So where older people might get on a train or a bus and go into town, our elderly are more likely to get into a car. But the issue of interest for me is the cyclist one, because I noticed that in some of our larger cities, Dunedin, Wellington and Auckland in particular, there's been quite a bit of emphasis on cycle lanes. But there's been a lot of angst around that as well, because to make them safe, the cycle lane safe, you've got to take out the parking that's on the left-hand side. Because I suspect a lot of our cycle issues are around not moving vehicles, but people that park on the inside. A bike comes down the outside and somebody rolls the door open. So quite a complex issue, and I'm quite pleased from a safety perspective that we haven't pursued what we were trialling sometime down in Devon Street and other places, because while it's nice to be able to bike through the inner city, there are some horrible risks involved with it as well. Unless you really want to take those car parks out, which means you're going to force people into car parking as opposed to roadside.
Grant, or do you want to answer that, Russell?
I think today is really about us talking about our forward program, of which will include active transport modes, and I guess that's where the direction, our future direction, if we want to be much more carbon neutral in the future, we'll have to address some of those active transport modes in the city and actually determine how we go forward. But
okay, I'm going to just for time's sake, we're going to move on, but that is a very provocative slide, and it's always going to draw questions. And to me, as chair, I've got to say that number 1 out of 67 for the intersections highlights why we are so bad at roundabouts, why our drivers don't seem to understand how a roundabout works. So it all makes sense. So please carry on.
Can't seem to.
Batteries.
The computer's decided to have a rest.
Oh, well, that was a good presentation, isn't it?
Yeah.
With the cyclist thing, just while we're waiting.
There we go.
Right, carry on.
Here we go.
So I guess this slide is really just talking about the level of investment that we're currently doing, and what we're suggesting is that we spend about $8.5 million in OPEX, about $8 million in CapEx. Our subsidy rate from Waka Kotahi will be down to 51%. It is, but in terms of what we're spending, depreciation versus renewal, we have a gap in there that we will eventually have to continue to watch and manage over our time frame. So that's just really looks to give you the sort of order of spend that we have. So the 51% subsidy means that for every $2 you spend physically on a job, you get $1 from somebody else. So it's a pretty good, it's the best deal out there. So it equally means, and I'm going to pitch my story, is that when you start looking for savings, for every $2 you have to take off, you only get $1 value back. So just got to remember in that space that roading's the best investment in town.
Yeah, you're right.
Next slide.
Yeah, right. Don't cut the
We're
road
just gonna.
budget.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to wait till we get through the slides, and then we'll do some questions. Yeah. Cheers.
Radio. So our demand I've split into 3 spaces, and it's being people in place. So our CBD, our future stages in there, the CCTV, urban rejuvenation being Bluff, South City, and Windsor are all within the next 10-year time frame, 12-year time frame, and Bluff and Otatara. So lifting that level of service there. There's also safety and movement. So we've just spoken quite a bit about safety, about increasing programs into our road safety education, focusing our funding and investment with working with Road Zero and Waka Kotahi on our road safety capital projects and minor improvement programs. There's also the demand from the community, which you've all heard about, our unsealed road network, and moving into more active modes of transport. We also have new compliance requirements, and traffic management is one of those ones that's stepped up into a new level of a risk-based system. We're required to show more for our investment programs to Waka Kotahi and prove our spending with net present value calculations. We've also got a new project coming up, being consistent data collection throughout the national program, and that will mean that all of the roads nationally will be tested under the same measures, and then the next project underneath that, being the asset management data standards, will enable Waka Kotahi to ensure that we're all bidding with the same data and consistent. That's going to kick off in the next 18 months, and it will be quite a considerable project for us to get all of our data into the right process and system. And then on top of that, obviously climate change and risk and resilience is now an oversight with all investment going forward. We also have our bylaws and policies that we need to ensure compliance of, being the code of practice and the new footpath management policy, etc. We also have a challenge to maintain our current levels of service with our investment levels.
Yep. We're just going to let Erin add to that.
Apologies, I should have just made sure we provided the context at the beginning of the process. This is just a little bit different to how we've done this perhaps in previous years, in that what staff are putting forward through the various different slide packs today is somewhat more unconstrained than what we perhaps would have seen it in the past. So previously we would have essentially run a financial lens over this around what was affordable. This time we're putting much more forward to council, and then I guess there needs to be some good conversations between elected members and staff around where the best spend is, given our financial constraints as we work through the process.
So,
okay. Thank you.
Yeah, maintaining our current levels of service. So we've just currently out for a new road maintenance contract, and that will be started on the 1st of October. Whakakotahi are obviously indicating there's not going to be much more money in the bucket for us. So bitumen costs and contractor availability are on a tighter budget, and we have no internal ESG or internal consultants anymore. So we are using external consultants to provide our engineering professional services. Then improvements to opportunities for cost savings is to ensure that we're investing in the right places using the future network operating framework, which also leans on that ONF that we spoke about at the beginning. Considering reducing the level of service on some of the surfaces, so moving from asphalt to chip seal, or from instead of just chip sealing, using some rejuvenation seals in that space. Allocating the lane corridor in a different allocations towards that, using AI technology to develop models of where we can invest in the right place at the right time, rather than on a life cycle management approach. Well, it would be still a life cycle management approach, but just with condition layered onto it. And then we're into, yeah, I think that's the word.
So what we've developed over the next couple of slides are I guess some of the options that Erin has talked about. So we've really put up all of the options that we think are things that are beyond our current renewal approach, which really gives an opportunity for councillors to see what we think could be things that you might have an interest in, and then as we get towards the end of this pack, areas where you might want to make some choices. So this slide is all about the OPEX. So what we're actually suggesting through here is that these are the things that aren't our normal BAU. So we've got things like once we have our CCTV up and running, it will have an additional cost. We've got Stirling Point in the future, some option. We've got some additional city centre as we do other works, how we actually continue to maintain that area in the state that we wish for it to be. We're suggesting that we invest some more into road safety education programs. We've got under 121, which is the additional effort that we believe that we will need to make sure that we can keep the streets we've currently invested in up to a tidy and appropriate standard, and some additional costs for some repairs in that area. So that's sort of the OPEX type of things that we see as being put on the table through the budget process and will need to be considered. So perhaps we'll go to the next one, because the next list's a little bit longer. So what we've also developed is a range of opportunities for council to consider where they would like to invest, if they would like to invest. And we've started this very briefly, the seal extensions, which we've heard is, and what we're suggesting is that we would invest $400,000 over 5 years, which being $2 million, into creating some seal extensions if that's what's required by the community. So that's $2 million over 5 years. Part of that will be is how would you, where will you do it is, I guess, a different question, but it's about that level of investment. Some of these capital projects may or may not get Whakakotahi type subsidies, so some of these might be at full council cost. So we have a whole range of, I guess, suite of pieces that you could pick and choose from. They include the greenways, footpaths that we're currently underfunding, further footpath works was currently we renew rather than extend our footpath networks. There are opportunities in there to perhaps put either footpath and or streetlights into Ototara if you so chose, or some ditch improvements at a later stage. We've got some works around Ototara School that might be appropriate to invest in. The Latham work, which is I think number 50, which is where we try to calm cars around our urban areas, because we often get lots of people ringing saying that it's too fast, how do we slow them down? And the only way we can slow them down is by investing in some of the things to make sure they're slow. At the moment, we don't have a budget allocated for that. We've got 3 items in there, which are the refresh of the suburban areas. Remembering we did some work some 20 years ago in Bluff, South City and Windsor, and we need to invest in that area. We've got some ongoing, we'll end up with some further CCTV renewal and replacement and then extensions. Stirling Points are more of an options. What are we going to do? Because we haven't got a magic solution. We've put some numbers about city centre stages, later stages, just as a suggestion. So I guess that's the sort of things that we're seeing as the smorgasbord of options that you might want to have and have some choices over. So, and our last slide actually gives an opportunity for you to perhaps give us some feedback, and we can put ticks and crosses against some of the things that you say. Yes, that's a good idea. No, it's too much, or we'll go away. We don't want that.
Okay. We've got just over 10 minutes until the next topic. I'm going to start with Grant and then Darren. Grant, you still got that question you had?
A few slides ago, but I've got another question. So just to try and understand what you put up there, Russell, so both the OPEX and the CAPEX, that's when you think the timing of that expenditure will occur.
Correct. These are things that are just outside our BAU, like our normal resurfacing or curb and channel programs. Yeah. These are things that we think are options that you might want to consider for the long-term plan and when they will occur, and any consequential OPEX that brings them back.
So the CCTV project, in terms of CAPEX, we approved a spend of about $1 million, I think. So there was an operational expenditure of $100,000 per year for 10 years, and there's a CAPEX expenditure of $200,000 per year for 10 years. So what I'm trying to understand is, are we going to be 10 years getting our CCTV up?
Absolutely not. But what I'm suggesting is, you have CCTV, you're going to have to keep operating. It's not going to, so that's the OPEX. So that's the OPEX. And then the CAPEX is actually, as you put more in, you'll want more.
Adding to it.
Right. Yeah, okay. And you might just say, we've already got $1 million. Yeah. Cross that line out. But I guess I'm putting it up because as you get more, you want more, I can assure you.
Yeah, okay, so that's cool. And then second question, sorry, is, because I didn't get one before.
Yeah, no, that's right. No, you got one in the bank.
It's not an allocation, don't worry.
Just how you prioritise the refresh of those suburban areas. How have you done that? So, you've got Bluff happening year 4, Windsor year 6, and South City year 8.
I'd love to say it's alphabetical, but it's actually in the order we did them. So we did Bluff first, and then we did South City, and then we did Windsor, and I just randomly put them across to space them out because there is quite a bit of work, and realising it is a cost. But I guess it's really saying is, and these are hundreds of thousands, so it's $1.5 million that we're talking about, is to actually address these as, Bluff hasn't had a refresh since 2006.
Yeah, well, it's probably more the South City one around the investment that's happening around Grey Street project and some of those other things, and we talked about it at the last council meeting, and it'd be good to see investment sooner rather than later in South City.
And I guess the opportunity is to bring those forward, but it just shows you what's in that 10-year period, because I'm a realist. I don't think you can afford all of that.
No.
I'd like to think you were with my 2-to-1 investment, but most of this won't be funded from Waka Kotahi, I would imagine. Okay. But you can't not remember those are the things that you need to do at some stage. And the challenge you'll face is which you can afford and which is in and which is not. And that's the huge challenge that will be faced through this budget, because I guess you're going to hear 3 or 4 presentations after this one, which will have a reasonably big list of options, and that's what they simply are.
Darren.
Just having a look at the KPIs that you were wanting to be measured against, and I have a concern around the top one, which is a reduction in the number of fatality accidents, because I think it's subjective. We don't want to wear the blame in reporting against a KPI if the majority of fatality accidents might be, say, driver error as opposed to intersection faults.
That measure is a measure given to us by the DIA and is a requirement of us to collect.
I'll stop there. I'll apply a handbrake since we're talking automotive.
Mr. Chair, I think there's also an opportunity there. It's also just a good time to refresh every year to say how have we done as a whole of community, and we agree that sometimes we can't control everything, but it is a good chance to refresh how important safety should be and is to our community, and actually keep our focus on that.
Barry.
Yeah, I had a meeting with Simon Valentine yesterday, the community policeman, and he brought up a lot of concerns about the CCTV not working, and how do we stop board races like this is where some of these accidents are happening. They don't care. They just run right through intersections. They just keep on going. Is there any way we can plan to put speed bumps in some of our streets to slow these ones down?
I guess that's
worked in
Phillip and Fiddle Street,
ones like that.
We have, and that's, I guess, part of what we call a LATM, a local area traffic management. But that's actually, you have two things you do: is you either you move them, which is great when you've moved them from, but to do the whole city will be a time-consuming, and you've got to balance the accessibility for the rest of the people against those people. It's a huge challenge everywhere, and relative to other cities, we have seemed to have possibly a lesser problem than other places, but it is an ongoing problem of safety. But interestingly, the statistics would suggest that that's not necessarily where our crashes have been occurring. Doesn't mean it's not a problem.
Yeah, just some feedback, Russell, around the three issues that you have there for Otara. Like, I can't see any reason why we would spend money on footpaths, lighting and ditches. And not everybody in Otara will agree with that, but people move there for a semi-rural lifestyle. There was never an expectation that a lot of the streets would have lighting. I mean, Duns Road and the safety corridor you got there has been an excellent development. And the one issue I think that still outstands out there, and you've touched on it, is the whole issue of parking and vehicle access around the school. I mean, that's something we need to continue to work on because it's been an ongoing sore for a while. But those other three, I wouldn't go there. I'd rather see the investment at South City. We've got a greater intensive population base, so you get more bangs for your bucks.
I guess, Mr. Chair, we've put them up as ideas, and therefore that's the opportunity. I guess one comment around Otara School, we've placed it in there because we might have to co-invest with other people who create problems, and I would have a degree of caution about us having to fix some of those problems. We have lots of issues around schools, but once we set a really strong direction that we will be involved, and I haven't necessarily put lots of numbers beyond that. It is certainly a problem. It's a problem for the community. It's a problem we need to invest in and find an acceptable solution.
Okay, Evelyn next.
Yeah, Russell, I'm looking at the safety improvement LATM, which I assume is the things like the reduction of speeds around certain areas and certain streets, all that sort of thing. To market this to the population, how do we demonstrate that what we're have done to date has made a difference? What measurements are we taking to assess that? Because I live in one of those areas, and what I notice is that some people are really good, and then there's the other people who no amount of signage or even traffic lights has any impact on their behaviour. So to justify doing more, how do we say to people what we've done is working and we need to do more of it?
It's a really, really, really good question. I guess part of that is how much resource do we put into that, and that's probably where we haven't necessarily delivered fully on post-implementation studies, and that's a big challenge. But what we do see is speed reduction in the areas. I know that certainly when Windsor Street put the bumps in, we got a shift in the speed. People have learnt to drive them, so we've got a little bit of an increase. But you're right, as you invest into these areas, part of that might be that we need to actually show that we are getting the right outcomes. What we do also have is we have a number of intersections where we have forward programs where we've got some really interesting parking and traffic related issues that we will need to bring back to council to talk about how we solve problems and how some very hard decisions might need to be made to actually solve these problems. And often, more often than not, all of our troubles around fixing things are around parking. So the short answer to your question is yes, we need to do more to demonstrate, because not everybody likes the way they drove somewhere cut off by council. And the sorts of things that we would talk about are in some of our busy roads having left in, left out. So you wouldn't be able to go straight through, or you wouldn't be able to turn. Where are the crashes? What are the crashes caused by? So we would force people to use our road hierarchy to actually travel on roads where we want them to be on, and it means we would, in control. That's what the network operating framework does. We've got busy roads. We would make sure people would have to travel on that, not on our grid network. And that won't necessarily, to be fair, be the most popular of decisions for a period of time.
Right. Two last questions, Grant, and then the Mayor, and that's the end of the section. Thanks.
So just Stirling Point, we were down there a wee while ago with the Bluff community, and it needs some work, so it'd be good to see it brought right up the curve in terms of investment. And secondly, how do we analyse the investment? So how are we actually monitoring that every dollar spent in any of these areas, be it roading or some of this infrastructure, is actually getting as much of a dollar return? Are we doing any analysis around that and where we can make some changes? Because it's always generally about more asking for more money, not necessarily about looking and seeing if we can be more efficient around how every dollar is spent. And the classic I'd point to is road safety, is health and safety managing on the roads. The information I've received is that up to 40 cents in every dollar that's spent on the roads is directly related to health and safety. And so if you get more effective and efficient around how health and safety is undertaken, you should get a 20% increase without spending any more money.
It's a really good question. I know under our renewals program, which isn't necessarily these, we have to do what they describe as net present value type calculations. So we can't repair a road until such time as we've actually done enough maintenance over a period of time. So it sounds like a strange thing to say, but sometimes we have to maintain it, let it go, and then repair it. We also know that cost benefit ratios are used on safety improvements. So often if you have crashes, then you have the cost of crashes benefit by reduction. So that's why some of the bigger projects generate it. But some of these are really difficult because some of them have got community goodwill, and there are a number of factors you can apply when you do certain things in LATAMs, because you know that if you don't have straight through or right hand crashes, you don't have those, so you can have a reduction in your potential to cause crashes. But it's a challenge in some of these areas to actually do a pure business case and cost benefit ratio on some of the investment.
Mr. Mayor, last question.
Yeah, Russell, just around the issue of a closure of S Street. I know you and I have talked about this, but it just seems to be an ongoing concern that as we're trying to enliven our CBD and get more activities in S Street in particular at night time, and we had some recently with the flamethrowers or whatever they were, we had to get a traffic management system to come in and I guess manage the street that was already closed with bollards that we just push up anyway. $2,500 for about 3 or 4 hours. It just takes away the incentive for other groups that might want to do an activity in there to have that cost as well. So whether there's some way internally that we can help keep that cost down, or have internal resources that we can use as opposed to contracting that out, because it just seems prohibitive of small groups wanting to do things.
Russell, do you want to comment to that?
Given the time, I'm happy to perhaps bring a paper to council, because I think we've indicated that somewhere through the life of East Street we will need to revisit how we use East Street. I guess in simple terms, I think the cost of doing traffic management for the night closure was actually $600 of actual, I guess, hiring equipment in a plan. A big chunk of the time was actually having resources on site from the company to manage the site. Yes, it's a cost, but if something goes wrong, we have to still follow our legislative thing. It is a road, and the road has a purpose. If you want to stop it for an event, you have to have a traffic management plan. But if we can reduce the cost, we're all for that. We're not necessarily trying to put a barrier up. So,
Cool. Thanks, Leslie and Russell. But before we close this one off, Rhiannon has asked me to ask you all if you can pick your top 3 from that list of options for council to consider, and email them through to Rhiannon by the end of the week. Be fantastic. Just pick 3.
Russell, do you want to speak to this slide and give some different instructions? I'm just thinking it's probably best done offline now.
we can do it offline. In the last couple of slides, all we just did is actually put a box there, and you could we can certainly circulate that, so you can give some suggestion about where your direction would be, because we'll need that to incorporate that in our plan.
Okay, so you're going to send that out to everyone. Awesome. Right, Pania.
I just wanted to highlight, sorry, I missed the boat on that, but you're correct. Bluff hasn't had a refresh for many years, and the road, and because we have so many trucks that come in and out, especially to our port, you know, there is sort of some need for attention around that, as well as the Stirling Point.
That's two separate things. One's
they're two separate things, but I'm wondering how we can connect them.
Certainly, our proposal is about street and people space.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is sort of inside the 50k zone.
Yeah.
Thank you, Russell. Do you want to swap seats or stay there? I see you're in the next one, are you? Are you not? We have solid waste. And that's Russell and Annie, no?
No.
Erin.
So this is going to primarily be Annie's presentation, and I guess I'll just be here in case we get any curly discussion. Over to you when you're ready.
Right, we've got quite a few slides here, so I think we'll go through all the slides and then save the questions to the end. Thanks.
Kia ora, everyone.
Bring that forward.
I'll be going through these 9 items in the slides to follow. Activity type. Waste portfolio has 2 types of activity: WasteNet activity and ICC only activity. WasteNet activities include rubbish collection, rubbish disposal, and the education and communication delivery. Invercargill City Council only activities include solid waste activities, which are transfer station services and recycling services, and other activities around the closed landfill. I'll be talking about the different contract numbers mentioned here in the contracts update slide. Next slide, new legislation changes. New legislation changes were announced on 29th March 2023, and these legislation changes have provided councils with a timeline to improve curbside services to minimize the waste into landfill. The changes are: number 1, standardized acceptable recyclables by 2024. This essentially means making materials collected from households for recycling the same across Aotearoa from 2024. The figure on the right-hand side shows what will be accepted in our yellow bins starting February 2024. Number 2, residential curbside recycling services by 2027, meaning councils need to ensure curbside recycling services are provided to all households in urban areas, that is towns of 1,000 people or more. Number 3, residential food scrap collections by 2030, making food scrap collection services available to all households in all urban areas by 2030. Number 4, business scrap collection ready by 2030. getting businesses ready to separate food scraps from general waste by 2030. You can see the MFE timeline for these activities in the below figure. Next slide, WasteNet and new legislation. What these legislation changes would mean for WasteNet. Our current waste minimization and management plan aligns with existing legislation. However, we do need to incorporate what is required of the changes from the proposed new legislation. Also meaning we need to strengthen our focus on education and communication delivery to drive behavior change. Our KPIs for waste diversion will be driven by these percentages that you can see there. Figure C on the right side shows the reporting timeline. Next slide, WasteNet update. Just a general update on WasteNet. Councillor Keith Howell of Go District Council has been appointed the WasteNet Chair, and Mayor Mr. Ben Bell of Go District Council the Deputy Chairman. WAG meetings have now been reinstated for WasteNet, and the first meeting was held 15th May 2023. Reporting format has changed to WasteNet and is being presented to the Waste Advisory Group. The waste minimization education strategy and education plans, action plans, and the WasteNet budget for 2023-24 have now been completed and approved by WasteNet. Next slide, waste contracts. General update on waste contracts. Contract 550, curbside collection and transfer station services. This is under contract with Bond Contracting Limited and contracted until 30 June 2027. Glass curbside collection service is the upcoming activity. Service being planned to start July 2024. Future activities are organic curbside collection services to be included into a later date, with the timeline for this service being 2930. We also need to look at updating technology that we are currently using in order to capture waste data more accurately. Contract 5279, landfill services. This is under contract with AB Lime and contracted until 9th July 2028. Waste contracts continued. Contract 1057, recyclables acceptance contract. This is with Recycle South and in place until 30 June 2025. Contract is not currently being managed through WasteNet agreement, although has provision to service all Southland councils. Upcoming activity is the curbside standardization of recyclables by 2024. This essentially means that the sorting process will need to improve recyclable material quality through the reduction of contamination. Some challenges. Recyclables markets are increasingly limited and constantly changing, whereby improved quality of recyclables are required. New legislation change compliance is likely to increase the costs. Health and safety wise, waste services is one of the 10 high-risk industries in New Zealand, according to Health and Safety Regulations 2016. Asset management. The new river estuary closed landfill. Environment Southland is currently progressing a scoping document to inform what is required to be considered in further investigation of the new river estuary landfill in order to meet ICC, Runanga and ES requirements. A cost of $100,000 is estimated to engage an external consultant to project manage, workshop, and develop the scope of work needed to be carried out in the next phase of investigations. Invercargill transfer station, possibility of upgrading to a resource recovery park to sort and transfer recyclable materials and residual waste. We need to undertake an initial business case and investigate funding options, including MFE. Planning costs are estimated at $400,000. This is how we are looking in terms of OPEX and CAPEX for 2023-24 with 2 full-time staff. To summarize this slide, the level of service, the solid waste activity balances the social, cultural, environmental, and economic factors for the benefits to the wider community through collection of solid waste and through providing facilities for the sorting, collection, recovery, and disposal of waste. Solid waste activity also collaborates with other local territorial authorities for the coordinated delivery of waste management and minimization in Southland. Level of service continued. Next slide. Figure D on the right side shows the suburbs we are currently servicing. I understand at the March workshop, Council confirmed they do not wish to consider extending curbside collection services to suburbs and areas currently unserved, including Ototara. However, as per new proposed legislation changes, all councils in urban areas that's more than 1,000 residents must have their recycling service in place by 2027, meaning Ototara will need to be included by 2027. To check whether our towns meet this threshold, I have used the Stats New Zealand geographic boundary viewer that was provided in the MFE report, Improving Households Recycling and Food Scrap Collection, published in March 2023. This report is available on the MFE website. The smallest urban areas, those with between 1,000 and 2,000 people, will be included in this regulation for clarity. Next slide. These are the estimated CapEx and OpEx costs for the new services and the different options around the collection structure. Level of service continued. The waste minimization education and budget sits within WasteNet and has been approved by WasteNet. WasteNet Waste Minimization Education and Communication Strategy provides a framework for delivering education initiatives and communication activities across Southland to induce behavior change, minimize waste, and increase efficiency. The education framework, budget, and delivery timeline are now complete and approved by WasteNet. Requirements to maintain compliance. First one is standardized acceptable recyclables by 2024. This essentially means starting February 2024, all council household recycling services must accept the same standard set of materials. Some councils will need to stop collecting some type of materials to start collecting new ones. Some will need to stop collecting liquid paperboard, foil, aerosols, soft plastics, polystyrene, and plastics 3, 4, 6, and 7 in their household recycling collection. These materials are problematic to sort and recycle and often end up in the landfill. Some will need to collect new materials such as plastic number 5, glass, and pizza boxes. Councils that need to start collecting glass will have until 2027 to do so. Our costs will be around the education and communication campaign, driving the message through to the general public on what is required of them to achieve this outcome. Focus will be on how we get public to rethink waste, to reduce waste at their household levels. For example, leave your bins out only if you need to, putting the right things into your recycle bin, keeping your recycling clean and free from contamination, reduce and prevent food waste, think twice about waste before purchasing products, etc. MFE is developing 2 sets of campaigns that councils could use. The figure on the right side, you can see that shows the launch timeline for these communication.
I just have a wee question. Is it okay or?
We're just gonna, for this slide.
Okay.
Yeah, we're just gonna do them right at the end. Thanks.
Okay.
Carry on.
Thank you. Measuring performance. These are the proposed 3 levels of KPI. One is WasteNet, the other one is Invercargill City Council long-term plan, and then you've got the Invercargill City Council internal. This is how we are measuring waste currently. These are the current KPIs. Performance standard direction from Ministry for the Environment. The new waste strategy sets a series of national targets and goals to be achieved by 2030. I haven't listed those targets here. I'll talk to it. The waste diversion target for the effectiveness of curbside services is set as a 10% per person reduction of waste going into the bin, a 30% per person reduction of material going to final disposal, that is going to a landfill rather than being recycled, a 30% reduction in biogenic methane emissions from waste. The standard material list is being created and councils are required to comply. We are still waiting on further information. There are some useful reading available on the MFE website if you're interested to know more. Future activities. We need to start looking at these activities as we head further down the path. We are currently working on a battery disposal project, but this is in the initial investigation stage. Next steps, we need further direction on these items, so certainly need more information from the Ministry for the Environment. Yeah, and thanks for listening. Happy to take questions now.
Okay, Panya, I'll give you first go.
Yeah, my question is, with the new changes in mind, what around waste that go into bins and being disposed of, what's the items that you've actually excluded or noted that are now being excluded from the bins? What's been put in place for them? I mean, you just mentioned batteries was one.
Yeah.
What about the other items?
So it depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about things that have been excluded now with standardisation of recyclables, for example, so essentially this I think is driven around that concept of focusing on what you can recycle well, and actually that we have end use markets for, rather than hoping that we can recycle absolutely everything. My understanding from the data that I've seen is that the volumes of those categories of recycling that we're no longer collecting is quite small, that the chunky volumes are in those materials 1s, 2s and 5s, and the other ones are quite small. They will be diverted to landfill as a result of that, though.
So they'll just go into your normal rubbish then?
They would, but I have seen stats from some of those councils that made the change early voluntarily, and just saw the rubbish and the recycle lines didn't change a great deal because of those being a lower volume.
Okay, Barry.
As far as our yellow bin contamination, where we're putting glass in with cardboard, and it's no good for anything then. We've got a time span here for glass collection of 24 to 25. Can we not speed that up?
Yeah. I actually have some further information that Annie and I have only just become aware of in the last 24 hours around the achievability of even 1 July 2024. The information that we're receiving from our contractors is that we would actually have to order the new bins as at the end of this month for that change to be possible. And obviously we've still got a period of public consultation, etc., to go through. So we are working with our contractors around as fast as we can make that happen, but even 1 July 2024 we may struggle to achieve.
Just jump in there. There is another option. Over the weekend I spoke with the chief executive of Kapiti Coast, and they've got quite an ingenious way of doing this, and sort of left field, is that they use the yellow bin alternate weeks. 1 week it's standard recycling products. Second week the same bin is with glass, and all it requires is the management of within a household to have the appropriate product put in. And now that's an option that we may want to consider, since it's in trial by another council. It doesn't require buying any more bins.
I absolutely agree that it's a good way to go, and it was what happened when I was in Queenstown, and we did exactly that. What it requires, though, is for you to be already doing a weekly collection that you can then drop back to those being fortnightly. Because we're already at fortnightly, then we start having to drop even further back to monthly, etc. So it does have a much bigger impact on us, but it is one of the options that we've put forward for consideration.
Right, so it gets rid of the bin purchase option, but it creates another logistic problem. Grant?
Yeah, I think that's a good segue. There's a couple of things here noting by 2030 we have to have a 50% waste reduction, and because of the population size of Otatawa, we do have to have a solution to collect their waste by 2027. Yeah, so that sort of answers the decision up there around that second one. But I think it's really important that we've got to have a strategy to reduce waste, and we've got to actually try as much as possible to leverage off other councils, as you've just highlighted, Rangi, but also think about waste as a resource as much as we can, and what can we reuse, recycle, but it folds back to what's our strategy around waste, and we've got to nail that down and then come up to solve the problems around if we use two bins, one week, one the next, as opposed to just trying to go around and hit moles on the head and fix problems without actually stepping back and saying what's our strategy 10, 15, 20 years. And that fills into all the sorts of things that Environment Southland are doing around, you know, because if you look forward, there's no way we continue to, we've probably got to re-look at that down there, because the water's going to come up and then we're going to get really exposed around what's there.
It is. I mean, look, one of the things that's come up with the MFE, and they've suggested, well, they haven't suggested, they're going to make it mandatory that by 2030 we've got a curbside collection for your food scraps out of your kitchen. Now, over the past month, we've had consultation with the public, and the public have strongly said, well, the feedback I've had is composting is very real, and you use your food scraps to create composting, you grow your vegetables and stuff like that. Now, that makes common sense, except the MFE, when I challenged them last Monday about this, they weren't interested. They're whacking moles on the head. They don't understand. And imagine, 2/3 of Invercargill's population wanting to retain their food scraps, and then having to fund an expensive. This involves extra trucks picking up a bucket this big. I mean, quite hilarious actually.
But if you look, and there was a thing on the TV over the weekend about the urban gardens in Christchurch, and the lady, and we must go and see when we're up there for the long-term thing. And, so if you thought about the people that don't want to use their waste for compost, and there's an education process there, maybe that we could have localised, community gardens where that goes to them, and then the community gets to share.
Absolutely. Aaron, do you want to comment on this, or is this something that council needs to drive an initiative for? Because the MFE have just got no idea on this one.
I've actually asked for some statistics out of our waste swap analysis that we did prior to the last waste management and minimisation plan, just so that I can actually go back and have a look at Invercargill's makeup of waste. Look, I possibly would tend to think that the MFE view that people perhaps overthink that they divert more than they perhaps do is probably a correct one. I think we'd want to make sure that any of our decisions going forward are based on the data that we have in front of us.
Yeah.
But we have that data, and we can go back and do some analysis around that.
And final point, this is a real problem that we can solve ourselves. We shouldn't be waiting. We know where we've got to get to. We shouldn't be waiting on MFE. I think this is a great opportunity for us to grip this up, develop a really good strategy for our community, and get on with delivering it in a really sustainable and successful way for our community. If we think about waste as a resource, we educate and we use technology to make decisions.
I think one of the things that we could do better in that space is around, we haven't looked at our transfer station, I think, transfer stations to their full potential in terms of that diversion. So one of the things you will have seen, that there was an item up there around investing in actually looking at what our transfer stations would need to be able to move them towards that term that tends to be bandied around as resource recovery parks. Yeah. And whether or not we have sufficient space to be able to do that, if it's the right location for us, I suspect we probably can find sufficient space to do that. But I think there's absolutely more that we can be doing at that coalface, absolutely.
Evelyn.
So Grant picked up on some of what I wanted to say, which was about local solutions to this issue rather than wait. So the parakore, all those sorts of things. Are we partnering well enough? Are they or is there ability to partner? I know that Aurora Gardens, those sorts of things, would they be able to use that? And is that a way? And I think of that with the glass as well. I'm really reluctant for us to wait, and I know this is the long-term plan, so I'm sort of getting a little bit out of line, but it really bothers me that we know there's a problem with glass collection, that we sort of keep pushing it off down the road when we should actually be reaching out to our community and saying, what is your solution? Because we don't have all the answers, but what answers we have cost you lots more money. Can you come up with a solution that is community focused, community driven, that meets everybody's needs? It needn't be the, MFE be blowed. It needn't be the big monster that we're trying to create, because I saw in there 4 bins, and I'm going, what 4 bins? I've only got 2 now. I'm going to have 2 more. In where my son lives in Waikato, they have a small, wouldn't even be a quarter of a bin without a lid that you put your glass in. We don't have green waste. You have to pay to have green waste taken here. Is that one of the bins that MFE are talking about? Are we further dividing things up, and how does that get collected? What is our community appetite for that? What do we do with the green waste if we collect it? Are we looking at composting it or whatever? It's some of this could be driven by community answers rather than us as bureaucrats. Sorry.
No, that's a fair question.
I can just provide a piece on the community aspect that we do already have in train. There was money in the WasteNet budget allocated. Well, there always has been money allocated to community initiatives. What we're doing is just essentially refocusing that in the same way that Invercargill City Council issues a call for applications for community funding annually. We're actually going to roll in the same with our waste funding, so that it's very visible what budget we have there, and that once a year we will call for applications into that, so that there is the ability for there to be community driven solutions in that space.
Okay, Erin, I need to follow on from the question of Evelyn with the not green waste, because that's completely different, with this food scrap collection by 2030. Obviously the MFE must have an intended place for it to go to, where it, to be turned into whatever. Now, is that something we have to go out and tender for, or the cost of that, does council wear that, or how does this whole work? Because we're actually creating, under the whack-a-mole thing, we're creating a monster that really is not needed. Because you're going to have to take this truck full of beautiful potato skins and stuff and go somewhere, and who funds that? Does council fund that plant, or do we get a private contractor, or how does it work? Because you can't, it's good enough to have the collection, but
So at the moment, for those who've been a little closer to it, you may have seen that there were 2 different timelines around food waste collection. The earlier timeline, Annie may be able to tell me that, 2027 I think it was around those local government areas that already had a disposal, for want of a better word, solution within their region, and the latter timeline being for those that did not. There is currently funding available for us to provide an application to do a business case on what our solution may look like for Southland, or Otago Southland potentially, and then we expect that there may also be funding available for some of the capital investment in doing that. But absolutely, you were right, this is going to cost councils money to deliver probably a capital solution, and then ongoing operational costs post 2030.
So with that, can I ask that just sometime this year that it's brought back to council, this council, not necessarily WasteNet, what an indicative price may be, because we're looking at setting rates and stuff, and we need to know roughly the impact per household on what a government directive like this may cost.
And so we have got some tentative figures in the budgets, but as I'm sure you can imagine, we're not at all sure yet what that solution may look like. But we would expect it to be upward of $10 million.
Right, just to get rid of your potatoes. Rightio, okay, Ria.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to pop back to the glass collection focus. At this stage, I'm interested in putting together, or knowing for us to put together a really good strategy of how to cope with that. I'm not totally convinced that throwing up some more bins, having a vehicle collect the bins and transport off that glass to somewhere, I'm not actually convinced at that stage that that is our best option, and would like other ideas to come forward. I've always banged on about the fact that bottle banks would be a good concept here in Invercargill, such as they were many, many years ago, and that we could lean on a partnership with the IoT to collect all glass and beer bottles as well. In Australia, just recently, they have a scheme there and it's called Containers for Change, whether it's glass or plastic, and that, yes, it was originally a cost to do that, but it's returning tenfold in terms of how to minimise that waste. The other option is what Grant said, that there are other areas that are swapping the yellow bin out for alternative waste products inside of those bins too. I think that looking at this and talking about it, but still not having a clear vision to move forward with, kind of like...
So I think there's in some ways we've possibly missed a little bit of a step in this process in that what a lot of other councils around the country have done in deciding what their direction would be for solid waste is essentially to do a business case process where they would look through all of the potential different waste streams and the different options and go, what do we want waste to look like in Southland out 10, 20 years? What I guess we're grappling with is that we're probably sitting a little bit behind where some of the other councils have gone, and so I think rather than
in Southland or
in Southland,
we're sitting behind.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yes. So
Southland.
there are some
Gore's got no recycling.
No.
Then we could be the lead.
Gore is part of Southland.
Yeah, but we're not behind Gore.
I'm talking about Southland being somewhat behind.
Oh, Southland's behind.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what we could do is we absolutely could go back and do that, but it means that we'd need to invest some money and we would need to probably take 12 months out in doing that. I think what feedback I've received, even in previous workshops that we've had as well as outside of workshops, is that the rest of the country has done this work. We need to leverage the work that the rest of the country has done and get moving. Now, I'm most happy to take direction from council as to where they would like us to go moving forward.
Sustainably quickly.
Right, I've got a list here. We've got Nobby's next.
You're being generous to say that we're the tail end of the statistics field. We're the worst by a country mile. So putting aside Gore that doesn't do any recycling and how MFE allows them for 4.5 years to do that's just mind-boggling. And to touch on the issue of the glass recycling, MFE again did a trial in I think Blenheim and somewhere else, might have been Kapiti, about recycling bottles or glass, and you got a refund for whatever you put into the system, and the cost was at the front end, which is a good way of doing it, but they've canned that now. Excuse the pun. They just stopped it and then we'll come back to it at a later stage. So that, I mean, MFE unfortunately tends to move around quite a bit on these issues. So I'm not all that excited about recycling food at this stage. That's too far off for me, but certainly the glass one we need to do. We really need to. But the other issue I think that came up, which was interesting, was the issue of the classes of plastics that we can recycle. And that landscape will change too, because if and when the palletising plant runs at its full way of doing it, certainly MFE and the Green Party have both said to me that once Makareo gets up and runs, and they can take all classes of plastic with the exception of bottle tops, which are too hard, but they've got a market for those, that they'll start pushing those similar sorts of plants into the likes of Auckland. We've got major issues. So there could be 8, 9, 10 plants spread around Auckland that just chew up all the plastics, which would be great. But the other thing, I guess, that's really, really frustrating, for those that weren't here last term, you probably know anyway that we've got the recycling contract here, and STC has got the supplementary contract that sits alongside it, so we still manage their load as well, which is okay. But Gore hasn't come on board, and even though their mayor said it was a campaign issue for him, we're 9 months down the track. It's just a slip of a pen on a piece of paper and it could all be done, but it's just not. So while we sit in the WAG group, which is the advisory group, which is at the governance level, and talk about all these things, we don't have commitment. We just go round and round in circles. So that frustrates the hell out of me. And while I'd like to see us do well, us as in Invercargill, we still get measured by the regional result, which is what Rangi was saying, that, you know, Southland's the worst recycling region in the country. And we're not being helped by some people. So that's a level of dysfunction that I guess is frustrating. It'll be interesting on the issue of the bins going out to Otatara, because a lot of people pay privately for that, so they're going to get a rate increase, which is fine. You pay for what services you get. But it's really interesting. You don't see a lot of people in Otatara doing green waste and vegetable waste and stuff like that, because the minimum size of a section in Otatara is 1 acre. So a lot of people do composting. They've got a bit of thing out the corner and do their own thing. I do as well. It's not so easy to do it if you're on 1/8 of an acre in town, because food scraps being out can be problematic. So it'll be interesting once we start to implement towards that as well, I guess. But we certainly need to do something about the glass. It's just a no-brainer.
Right.
It ruins our recycling if it breaks up on the truck. If we put it into the other bin that goes to landfill, the weight goes up, and we pay by weight.
Okay, we've got Grant, Peter, then Panya.
Yeah, I think, Aaron, to answer your question, you know, it'd be good to see, you know, you're the SME in this, right? Is to see an action plan presented back to us to say, well, you know, what are we going to do and how are we going to do it on a one-pager?
And so just interrupt there. So this is where it gets fuzzy with WasteNet, Aaron. You know, do we do our own? I mean, I love to do our own because we get shit done.
Yeah, but it's, how I'd counter that is, I hear your point, but how's it any different for us in terms of what outcomes we're trying to get around waste? We're trying to be effective around it, around cost. We're trying to get the best outcomes around some of our community wellbeing, sustainability pieces.
I agree that I think from a staff perspective, the high level objectives that we're getting across the three councils, I don't think that there's a great deal of dissimilarity in that. There is an action plan for WasteNet, which a version of that did come through this forum. I understand if you're saying that it would be helpful to have that as a plan on a page, I think then that's something that WasteNet can prepare, which I would expect would be helpful across all three councils.
Yeah. We've got to start somewhere.
Yeah, but I just want to, I've been on WasteNet for 9 years, coming up 10 now, and honestly, it's not a fast moving machine, and you do not get consensus. So we're trying to do our thing. We're focused. We've got our Otatara issue. That's a separate issue. We've got lots of things we want to do, and it's been mentioned today. But if we put it through the WasteNet grinder, my experience is that we are going to have elected members from SDC and from Gore telling us basically how to do a key infrastructure thing for this city. And I don't think, Aaron, it's going to work.
At the last meeting was a good example of that, Grant.
Yeah.
We got talking about glass being important to do, and it's easily done in the city, just a third bin. But SDC weren't having a bar of it. They said, look, we've got small communities spread around the place. We're not going to run a truck way out to wherever, high nightcaps to pick up 20 glass bins, because the carbon footprint's just, you're shooting yourself in the foot with it. So they were looking at other options, but not bins. They were looking at places that the locals could drop their glass off, and it would build up for a certain period, and then it would be taken away. So there are different fixes to the problem.
Correct.
And getting consensus is really hard work.
Okay, look, we better keep moving along. Peter.
Yeah, thank you. I see the contract with AB Lime expires or comes to an end in 2028. It's 5 years away. What happens then? Do we renegotiate or got to find another place?
Oh, no, it's just a contract that you hopefully roll over. No, we don't want to go looking for another hole in the ground.
No, but that's what it says up there. I just asked the question.
Yeah.
Renegotiate with them.
Yeah. Do you want to talk to that, Annie or Aaron?
I think what we would be looking to do would be looking for the best value for Invercargill City ratepayers and presenting council with definitely one, and if there are any other options in that space.
So the other option would be the next A-grade landfill would be Cape Valley, Christchurch, to truck it there. So I think that could probably work itself out.
Train it.
Leslie, I'll note that, but we've got Panya next, then Leslie.
I'm very supportive of the recycling of glass and every second week in the yellow bin. That's all good. But I'm not really sort of got is really what we do with our hazardous type waste. Literally, I'm really sort of not clear on how we dispose of it. I mean, we're talking household chemicals, garden chemicals, those bottles, like weed killer and things like that.
Paint.
At the moment, I'm just really not clear, because at the moment we're putting them into the bin, but the changes that's going to change, it's now going to go into our rubbish, which will end up in our environment, which is damaging. So
that was raised at the last meeting.
Yeah.
And the MFE response was just terrible.
Yeah.
And we raised exactly the same thing. What about batteries? What about e-car batteries? And there's a whole raft of things. And all they said was, oh, yeah, we're looking at rubber tyres. And it's all the only thing they tend to do. And we said, look, we're putting a lot of stuff that we don't know where to put. And they had no idea, did they? They just drew a blank, really.
I think in terms of, we need to, there are only 2 staff that are employed at this stage across all of WasteNet. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that Invercargill City employs no waste staff. So in terms of what we can achieve, we had a look at our priorities from a WasteNet perspective. We did look at hazardous waste, and we decided that actually batteries was our first focus. And so at the moment, the team are doing a significant amount of work around a battery disposal option. And we'll bring an update back to WasteNet, and then obviously that will come through to council through that forum. In terms of hazardous waste, we had pushed that into next financial year. At the moment, our instruction is for people to take leftover hazardous waste back to the supplier that they got it from.
So you're talking household chemicals?
Absolutely.
Chemicals, so you're going to take the empty weed killer bottle back to the
Mitre 10 or that, yeah, that's right. At this
And
stage.
taste.
So we would intend to have a next step around potentially having a disposal perhaps at the various different transfer stations around the region, but that's something that's going to come at cost. Because obviously co-locating all of those chemicals together requires there to be specially built bunkers and things like that for it, specialist transport companies, etc.
Because we all use cleaning products.
I'm happy for you to feed that feedback into your WasteNet representatives that you would perhaps like a different focus of priority.
Yep, Keith Hole will call. Right, Leslie.
Thank you. Erin, I thought from previous workshops where we had discussed glass recycling pretty comprehensively, that we had more or less come to a consensus that Invercargill City Council could move alone on a solution for the city, that there probably was a different solution for Southland District Council which might involve collection points and perhaps the same sort of thing for Gore, but I thought we had reached a consensus that it was more a matter of us deciding whether it's a third bin, whether it's collection points in Invercargill as an interim measure, whether it's...
And I think I would suggest there was a consensus around elected members of that as well. However, that what I took was there was an instruction to staff to go away and essentially develop the options and bring that back through the long-term plan process. That's what we are doing at the moment. There's at this stage the discussions at an officer level are with Gore and Southland District to also explore the potential for that glass out bin and the cost implications for each different council around doing that. We're working through that process at the moment. What I would say though is that because we would probably struggle to do the lowest cost option for Invercargill City if we were going it alone, and that's just what we are working through at the moment.
Yeah, so you are presenting the possible go alone for Invercargill City Council.
I would probably intend to have that as a backup option if the other councils didn't confirm their long-term plans.
Because I thought we were interested definitely in the option of if we can't get the full regional consensus, that we would look carefully at doing it ourselves in the most cost-effective way. But I'm just checking with other councillors because I did.
That was my understanding too.
And so from a waste net perspective, we would need to provide each council with that option as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if the
in
other
case
two
there
councillors
wasn't,
didn't pick it up, we were still interested as
and
Invercargill City.
you know, similarly from Gore's perspective, if Invercargill City and SDC didn't pick it up, what would be the implications for them and SDC as well? I'm sorry, I'm sitting here a little bit with the waste net hat on.
I can see.
You're right, Leslie.
Yeah.
We did agree to that because
Yeah, because that's why I was getting confused.
Gore take two bins and just throw them both into landfill. They're not going to be in a hurry to get a third bin that does exactly the same thing.
So being an increased level of service, potentially this third bin or the glass service is definitely going to cost a wee bit more, even if we still use multi-use the yellow bin. People, elected members, have brought out other options of bottle banks, voluntary stuff, and this community focused stuff is really interesting, that you get off your ass and you actually do it, and you actually save money. It makes sense. I mean, the old days, the bottle drives and stuff like that, and if each household looked at how much actual glass they use, some probably use very little glass. That is, everything's in plastics and stuff. So I think if we can have come our LTP, and out of the LTP we get a decision by the Invercargill public on what the best idea is.
So there is a significant amount of time that goes into our contractors pricing each of those different options. At this stage, we have only asked them to price bin-based glass collections. Are we saying that we would like to seek pricing from our contracting partners around bottle bank only options?
I thought that's what we were expecting to get back.
Yes, I mean, Chair of Finance, yeah.
Yeah, well, the thing to me should be that if we make an investment or spend some money somewhere, the way it should work is there should be some saving. May not be directly a dollar for a dollar, but there should be some saving. Or if we took glass out of just putting it out at Browns, we wouldn't be paying as much for what we have to pay, to put it through the gate at Browns. That's correct. So there's some offset. If we use glass and put it down another channel, we're taking it out of our existing system, which we have a cost.
The main motivation behind the glass separation is the contamination of recyclables. So that's the driver. At the moment, some people are
It has a cost, because if it stays contaminated, it has a cost.
Massive cost.
Right. So there's an offset.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. So we're not just thinking about cost. There's offset benefit, right?
I don't think that we would find that this would be a purely financial, that this would stack up purely on a financial basis.
No. But by just reflecting just the cost, we're over-egging it around. If we have the cost less what we save, it becomes less cost to the community.
Oh, no, the swings and roundabouts, absolutely.
So we can absolutely, we can
that.
show you the contamination cost next to the glass out collection cost.
Yeah.
But that we don't have, I guess, data at this stage around how much of that total contamination cost is likely to reduce once glass is out.
And the other issue, Chair, is not just that, but if you leave them in the normal bins, you've got the cost that you're saving to landfill, because that's weight related.
Yeah, that's right.
So if you take glass out, you've got less cost.
Right, we're just about on 12 o'clock,
So,
and I'm going to let Leslie,
Chair, I would be interested, and I just want to gauge other people around the table, if we could get the cost of double use of a yellow bin as an option, because to me that seems like an issue that's probably well worth exploring, and we haven't got the cost now because it's.
How do you store in the meantime?
Yeah, I'd be really interested in discussing. That's the first I've ever heard of that being an option. It would be something we'd need to explore.
I would certainly be interested in exploring it.
Yeah,
as a possible option that could happen reasonably quickly.
It does also a little bit fly in the, and absolutely we'll go and have a look at it, but just be aware, it also flies a little bit in the face of that very clear colouring and allocation around different types of bins being used for different purposes.
That would have to be part of the education, but I think it's probably worth exploring if we're looking at all the options for what we could do as quickly as possible.
It's working in Kapiti.
Yeah, that's just education, isn't it?
I've been working up there.
So, Chair, you've seen the photographs recently of what happens when we get the wrong sort of stuff in the recycling bin. It was just, it was horrible. And so you've only got to get 10% of your population not understanding what week we're in, and you've got a mess.
Right, on the closing note.
Sorry, just as a closing point from staff, can we just have some direction around bottle banks? Is that something that staff are being sought to provide pricing?
I think so. That's voluntary.
Directions to where? It's a good start.
To the bottle bank.
Yes.
Bottle banks.
So
yes, if we're
you just got to be mindful that if we do
all the alternatives, then you've got to at least.
But you've got to do the alternative. You've got to have bottle banks or nothing. You can't have bottle banks and a blue bin that people are going to be charged for, because they'll say, well, look, geez, I'm not putting anything to my blue bin. I'm just running it down to the local shop and putting it in the thing. So it's got to be an alternative, but not a part solution.
But that's the whole point of us investigating, is to look at which options are best sustainability for our ratepayers.
Totally
we don't have that cost in front of us.
So, Aaron, the answer is yes, strategically placed.
I think actually, to Ria's point, we've actually got to step back a bit further and actually invest some money in understanding what a greater solution looks like in bottlenecks.
We just don't, exactly.
Because otherwise we're just going to run around and
stuff and just
spend some money doing this, and it might or might not work, or we can't execute it, or it doesn't fit in with what WasteNet want to achieve, and we're just going to keep going round and round and spending money. Let's step back further and understand what we're trying to solve here, and then how we can implement things within our jurisdiction, and what might get solved if WasteNet step up or step out.
I think, Aaron, have you got a sort of an indication now on the on what you're wanting?
No, I'm not. I'm sorry. Actually, I don't. What I guess I'm questioning is, are you asking Grant, your elected members who are on WasteNet, to go back and advocate at WasteNet for this piece of work to be done regionally? Are you asking Invercargill city staff to self-fund a piece of work, and therefore that will need to be done with external assistance and budget put aside for that?
Yep.
Yeah, well, I think I'll tell you what we'll do, because we've got time. Time's not
and
on
also
our
some
side.
time to do that, which means we're not going to implement anything in particularly quickly, because we're going to spend some time researching what the right thing is to do.
Look, I think just because we've got other topics to carry on here, we've got time next Tuesday. We can carry on this discussion in the infrastructure meeting. I'm sure as a late item in public, we can just narrow it down a bit more. People can have a think about it, because we're just going around the circles a wee bit here, and so. But I think the only way we're going to get it done is probably through ICC. But I hate the thought, Aaron, of using consultants to $30,000-$40,000 to get a report on bottle banks.
We had a bin.
We know
used to have a bin.
Yeah. So anyway, look, we're going to end that conversation now, and we'll carry on. Unless there's anything more in the report. No.
Yep.
No?
Essentially, staff are just looking for some clear direction.
Okay.
Can that be added? That paper be added to our resource centre?
Yes.
Because that's actually a really good paper.
Yep.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
we'll have another go at this on Tuesday. There we go. Beautiful.
Is there a paper being sought from staff on that?
I think if we can continue the line of thought and we can narrow it down. I mean, Leslie's raised some good points on where we've already been, and I think if we can just finalise it, the only reason I'm stopping it now is because we don't have time.
Yeah. Just a quick.
Can I just say very quickly that Barry's just raised a good point. Lots of people in Invercargill still have that small bin.
Yep, I do.
That could be re-emerging as a possible part of a glass solution. If we went the bottle bank way, that could be where you collected your glass to take to the bottle bank. So just saying, lots of Invercargill people have still got that small bin.
Look, I don't think we need a consultant to get some basic figures.
No.
If you worked on having a bottle bank somewhere, which is a big skip with spout on the top. You might want one for every 1,000 or 1,200 people in the city. So you're going to need whatever that works out to be.
30 to 40.
You need 40 or 50 or 60 or 70 of them spread around the city. How hard would it be to locate them? What would the cost be to provide the big bins? And what would the collection be once a fortnight or once a month, maybe even? Just pick them up.
Okay, right.
I could do that myself.
We'll have a chat about this next Tuesday. Thank you. Thanks, Erin and
This afternoon, Vivian Sallins, who's part of my team, he's the asset manager for property, been with council for a short time. He's going to lead us through some of these slides. So I thought it was a great opportunity for him to come and have this conversation. And these are about, this is like our other plans, starting to develop what we need to have in our asset management plan. And I'll leave it over to Vivian and I'll jump in when he needs some help.
Welcome.
Thank you, Kira. This presentation is about parks, community buildings, and public toilets. Push the button. Oops. Okay. We act as the owner of the property to manage the public facilities for Invercargill residents and visitors. However, the activities itself, they're managed by the activity managers of the respective areas. This is an overview of our priorities, community outcomes. We've highlighted the key challenges we will cover in this presentation. Jump into this one.
So this is one of our standard slides about highlights the level of operational expenditure and our CapEx. One of the things in this slide is a little bit more confusing because a number of our buildings sit within the project management office in the roadmap, so some of the numbers get merged together in this area, so it's just a wee bit merged up, to be fair. So
maintaining levels of service, we've managed the compliance requirements pretty well. We coordinate well with the activity managers to work with them to manage any outstanding issues. As a part of our 3 yearly updates, we've completed the asset condition assessments in 2022.
But perhaps we'll just go backwards. No, sorry, that one is fine. No. Back one. I think what we're saying here is that we're meeting those compliance levels, and I think that's a really important thing. So the building warrant fitness is one of those measures where you actually need to go out there and do regular things to your buildings. The ACM is the asbestos inspection, so they're undertaken, and the earthquake-prone buildings. So our buildings are, we've undertaken quite a bit of work in that space to actually make sure that they meet those requirements. I know that through the last LTP process, there was concern about not having information on a condition assessment. So we have completed the condition assessments across all of our buildings at a component level, but to be fair, the condition assessments give us information that doesn't actually tell you all the answers. So I guess, interestingly, Vivian was involved with those direct condition assessments, so he actually has quite a lot of background and knowledge in what they are and how we can use them. And I guess one of our challenges is to understand where we want to be in terms of our asset plan and our maturity, and that's something that we'll just come on to.
Yep. The next slide is about asset management maturity. Asset management maturity is a measure of being able to meet our current and future needs, and the lead indicator it is the lead indicator for our future performance. The idea is to reduce the gap between the current and target levels here.
So in fact, that's like the whole scale for everybody, and you can be anywhere on that continuum. And I guess the challenge for each organisation and each department is how far along there is. The further you are to the right, obviously the more defined, reliable and informative your plans are. So at the moment we're sitting about core, which often in a property sense is a good place to be, but we do want to continue to move over to the right. That would give you greater surety that we have a stronger understanding of a building and would be better at predicting what our future demands and needs are. And across the bottom are some of those areas where we actually see things that you've got to do to actually evaluate and consider on. And it's just not actually saying we've got a building and it's got a location. It's actually understanding its condition, what risks it brings. How can you plan what demands are coming out of it?
Yeah, and going forward with taking on buildings like the new museum, we've got to be better equipped with all the technology. So we've really got to get to the somewhere between or closer to the advanced level of maturity. We've ticked off these. We've done well with the compliance requirements. We don't compromise on these. Other than the regulatory obligations, we stay vigilant to any safety, demographic, and other well-being requirements as well. We go beyond the regulatory requirements by making the building safer and also looking at greener options to reduce, in our attempt to reduce the carbon footprint. As a part of improving asset management maturity, we need to look at having a good asset management information system. That's what we're striving towards. Going forward, this will help us improve efficiency by effectively minimizing double handling. A good example would be to have a live condition assessment rather than having it done every 3 years. So if we've got a system that we can feed it into directly, we always have the information we need at hand. We need to revisit some of the underutilized utilities and formulate a plan and identify a purpose for them.
And I guess what Vivian's getting at there is that we have quite a range of buildings from, civic theatres right through to some of the buildings that our parks colleagues have and use. And understanding where they fit in our organisation, which ones do we invest in, which ones do we focus on, is actually the challenge that we face, because having too many buildings often brings too much cost. So it's actually just trying to make sure that each of the building has a purpose, has a future, so we understand how we can actually manage those in a meaningful way going forward.
Measuring performance, levels of service and KPIs. The property team, as a part of our deliverables, provides support with specialist services to manage properties, assets, and let activity managers focus on what they do best, their core activities. Our deliverables are mainly indirect and qualitative, with a few quantitative ones which are mentioned here.
Perhaps we could just talk about the KPIs. So lots of those KPIs are actually what the activity managers will deliver. So I guess it's things that we sit across our operations team and our asset team and trying to establish really good, strong KPIs going forward is something that we'll continue to work on so that we can, I guess, measure how we're doing. And that's, I think, something we just need some more work on, but it's just trying to understand exactly what everybody needs. So.
These are the current roadmap projects handled by the PMO. We will be, once completed, it will be in a part of our portfolio. The overview of our portfolio. The Musing Rugby Park and the CAB are handled by the PMO at this point in time. And the housing, public toilets, investment properties will be covered in another presentation. So we're going to mainly focus on these.
So what we're talking about there is, over the next period of time, that's where our key focus is going to be, beyond being I guess, the important core of our building stock we hold.
Just want to interrupt there. The Civic Administration Building?
That sits under the PMO roadmap.
We've had meetings with the activity managers, and we've had discussions, and we've picked up some of the big items. I'm not sure, do we want to go through the list individually, or we've further highlighted particular ones at the end that we can discuss on further.
But I guess what we're trying to understand is, for those activities to operate in those areas, what are the key things that we need to make sure are included in our plan for the 3 years for the LTP and the 10-year and the 30-year long term. So we're trying to pick up all of the needs of those areas and make sure that they're well highlighted and planned for.
Got a few on Splash Palace Civic Theatre as well.
So Splash Palace is probably a really good example of one where the building's 30 plus years old, and we are continuing to look really closely at what the roof does. Obviously, when the roof needs replaced, it's not going to be an easy job. It needs to be well programmed, well planned, and understood how you do that. So that's not something you can just pop along one year and say, let's replace the roof. It's actually a really difficult piece of work to be done, and has to be coordinated with the team at the pool.
We've got the Scottish Theatre. We've got a more detailed discussion on the Scottish Theatre in the next slide, so I'll leave it for that at the moment. So with our increasing reliance on technology, we really have to look at the asset management information systems on a priority. We need to get to speed on with our asset management maturity, especially with the museum coming on board and some of the other newer buildings that will be technology intensive. So we'll pretty much have to be ready for that.
And that does align with the business improvement project that council's got focused on. So that's really saying is how do we actually put all our information in one place and be able to use it really cleverly many times over a long time. But that is also quite a challenge in terms of our team to make sure. But as you can imagine, the museum and some of those developments will be really highly, I guess, have lots of technology that we'll have to understand really well. And when you see some of the systems, they are just about in 3D. So there's a whole lot of that technological advancement we need to have to be able to ensure that those buildings are able to be maintained going forward, because they will need some love.
When you say the museum, you're also including the Tisbury storage facility.
The museum is just I guess, symptomatic of one of the new technology buildings that we'll have.
These are the big 5 portfolios in our budget.
So I guess what we were trying to show on the previous slide was really just is really just the order of numbers that we're anticipating. I think as we actually get more and more into our buildings, we will understand some of their demands more, but it's showing the sorts of numbers that are needed to invest as an ongoing, to have those buildings as part of our council, and how do we and maintain them over the period of time.
Right, in the slides?
Oh, there's one more.
One more,
Yeah.
and then we'll do questions.
So these are the options. These are further drilling down from the previous slides. We've picked up 5 big issues that we can talk about. We've got the Winter Garden, we've got the roof at the Splash Palace. The roof at the Splash Palace is, given its size and given its type, we could go for a like-for-like. It's the current one has served as 30 years and done well. It's showing signs of failure now, but it can go with a like-for-like replacement. But it's a good opportunity to have a look at what's available in the market and probably an upgrade, or we might end up with the same like-for-like replacement if that's the best one. But it is, it's an opportunity to look at things, and also given the other development phases with the Splash Palace. We've got a similar thing with the library roof. There's a barrel roof which has been a high maintenance one, so we can look at either a like-for-like or preferably something new to go in place. So we've got less glare, ergonomics is handled better, and things like that. With the Civic Theatre and Scottish Hall, they are heritage buildings, so they have a whole new different set of requirements. Something that's come up with the heritage building is the conservation management plan that needs to be in place. So it needs to be looked at as an entire project and managed within those frameworks. Yeah.
And I guess what Vivian's highlighting there is that it's the level of investment you want. Like, for instance, I think when we attacked the Splash Palace roof, it would be good sense to make sure we understood whether there were some better use. Could you put more insulation on it, or is the actual whole roof structure actually fine at the moment with what we're doing? So can we actually get a more efficient building going forward? And as 30 years on, it's highly unlikely that what we did 30 years ago is best practice now. So I guess that's the challenge, and we're highlighting there is a range of numbers about how much investment, because you could go for something that's relatively like for like, or you could really truly step up into a whole new area, but that's bring some dollars. So finding that balance is, I think, the thing that we'll work across the next few years as we develop those skills and actually work through. But we've tried to highlight the big key issues that are out there, and the level of investment that we're looking at. And clearly, like for instance, the winter gardens at Queen's Park has quite an impact. Whether you just go like for like, or do you actually step up into a different I guess a bigger, better. But I think there is actually a case that we have to develop to actually explain how that would actually work with the parks team. So
okay, right, we have questions. Trish, did you have your hand up? Yeah, Trish, then Evelyn.
So are these, do you need to prioritise these, or are they all needed to be done? Like, are they parallel or one first?
We've got a range of these over the 3 and 10 year period. So it's really trying to map some of those works to be done at the right time where we can afford it, and they need to be done. So the initial steps of all of these is to actually assess how urgent it is. A good example would have been Splash Palace has had some short-term repairs done where we've been and had a look, had to do some short-term repairs that will hold it for a period of time, and that has helped us reassess when that renewal would be from 2 years away to 3 or 4 years away. So we're still working through that, and that is a bit moving, but that's what our plan looks to actually try to produce for the LTP.
Evelyn.
Yes, so the notable omission from my perspective is the Parks office building. I don't see it there. I'm not sure if that's because Parks team themselves are being quite unassuming and not pushing something, but from a health and safety point of view, I would have thought that the Parks office building needed some attention. So it's not there. I've been in there. I find it less than, I'm actually disappointed that we have a number of staff working out of what is a cobbled together series of spaces. And I wonder if this is 3 and 10 years, when we would be planning to look at it, because I would have thought it should have been done some time ago.
You raise a really good question, and parks have a wide range of structures and buildings. At the moment, we've assessed its condition, and really we can continue to operate the building from our perspective, whether it's fit for purpose for the activity that they deliver outside of it. But if we can hold the building shell together, that's where the overlap between our activity and theirs is. Whether that's the best location, whether it's the best use of buildings, I think is an ongoing, but that's not necessary. That hasn't been one of the buildings that we've highlighted, and it certainly hasn't been our top priority at the moment, but we can readdress that.
Is it because it's not a public use facility, it's a staff use facility? And I don't mean to demean how staff look at things. I mean, we've got, there was reference to the Cheeky Llama, for example, which is a public access building. All the ones that I see there are public access buildings, and are we tending to prioritise those when we're looking at refurbs and all that sort of thing?
And I guess that's the challenge that we face with this, with the administration building here and or others, about where do we place it in that priority list. But I guess we've tried to focus on some of our bigger, our bigger structures and our more demanding, but whereas the parks administrative area, from our condition, the building structure itself is intact. Whether it's ideal for the fit for purpose and the the way they deliver within that structure is a slightly different question,
Thank you.
but a really good one.
Okay, Nobby and then Barry.
Just two quick questions. Just wanted to clarify, this building has a building warrant of fitness.
I will have to check that. It does.
Because the original slide you had up there said at this stage we have 100% building warrant of fitnesses for our building. So
I have checked that with the team, with the operations team.
Yep.
So, Mr. Chair, that's about you have a range of requirements for whatever systems you have in your building, and that's actually like a frequency check. So we've got emergency lighting, so we check means of egress. We're checking those are that's what a building warrant of fitness really relates to, the compliance related issues.
Sure.
And all of those, really the important the places where you have bigger crowds, bigger number of people are the key things that we have maintained.
Sure. And the other issue is the issue of earthquake prone building status. So are all our buildings, have they all been assessed? That's one issue. And the second issue is, given that we started about, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago on a map that we had with the CBD, which said that council also has a role beyond what it does for its own buildings, but has a role towards how it looks at other buildings as well as the regulator. So how far are we through that CBD issue, and are our own buildings okay?
Perhaps can I answer the second one first?
Yeah, sure.
The second part is that's actually a regulatory function, which I'm sure Jonathan will be able to help us through there. So that's actually how we deal with those. In terms of our existing council buildings, I would say we've done the majority of our bigger buildings, and they do have a range of earthquake ratings. And over time, we will need to confirm what those ratings are. So obviously, everyone's presumably reasonably familiar with the less than 34 and the 67 and the 100. So I guess it's actually saying not every building has to be 100% of the new building code, the new building standard. And it's actually trying to address how which building needs what level, so that we can continue to manage those buildings within that envelope, and what is the time frame to actually make that building compliant, or meet the level that council will set, I guess, is probably the key thing.
Yeah, why I ask it, I guess, is that sometimes we get some accusations that we might be out to the private sector, putting the heat on them to go through the process, which is 2 years to get an engineering status report, and then you get assessed. And in fact, we may not have done that with our own buildings or buildings that we lease.
We've done, I think, just about all of our buildings and the bigger buildings, including we've assessed some of our treatment plant structures and those sorts of things. So we've had quite an extensive and expensive program to actually go through and assess those, which part of that is that sometimes those standards continue to develop and evolve and change. So what I guess the assessment was 5 or 6 years ago is now different as they've learnt more. So often you have one, then you have to go back and have a refresh of it because it's been further defined, or Kaikoura and those sorts of things continue to assist in understanding the performance of earthquake in buildings.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Barry.
Yeah, just in relation to the ex-RSA hall over here, I noticed it's got a brand new roof on it. I know that there's only a lot of people that use that hall at any one time of the indoor bowlers, and that's not very often either. So wouldn't we been better to put that money of that roof, because I'm sure it cost a lot of money to put that roof on.
Council sold the buildings some 5, 6, 7 years ago to a private individual. So we're no longer the owner. We're no longer the owner.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's a private decision.
Grant.
Yeah, a couple of things. You referenced back a couple of pages about your asset management system, and you're wanting to invest in one platform.
Yeah.
And we had a discussion at infrastructure, I think last meeting, around making sure we've got technology and using data to be able to make informed decisions versus just going with a flat depreciation rate of renewals program. So does the system you're thinking about for this encompass a wider view of some of our other assets, or is it just a pure property asset management?
No, the wider.
It's a wider, good man.
So
Cool.
can I add on to that a little bit? Is that currently council's assets as a whole sits on a number of platforms.
Yeah, no.
So
you're moving to one.
But part of that, the business improvement program, which Patricia will be wanting to talk about shortly, needs to fit under that suite. So as whatever happens to the Three Waters, at the moment we do our property under our IPS system, which is the Three Waters. Going forward, what that will be, it needs to be one platform which actually has that ability to do that. Most of our depreciation and our valuations done outside our asset systems at the moment, because none of those systems are particularly good. But the future says if you don't have them all in one place, you can't keep your data, you can't actually make good, meaningful, long-term decisions about it.
So that'll be in place for our next financial year?
Financial decade, did you say?
And secondly, just with respect to the...
will that mean that staff will get the training to support the use of that?
Yeah.
That'll have to be parallel, really.
The BUP
I'm
patron
gonna
over there.
It's a hospital pass, Patricia.
It was a hospital pass. It's not a hospital pass. So we have got it within our program in the business enhancement program. It isn't a easy fix to put in a new asset management system. It is a multiple year journey that will include training, change of process, and a lot of things. It's just where we fit it within the program, as we pretty much change nearly every system council currently operates under.
Yeah, but it's a worthy investment, because the sooner we can make informed decisions, the better.
Mr. Chair, one of the things that you might have heard of as a product is what they call BIM, and it's like a three-dimensional. There's some organisations have done it from the beginning to the end of even the design phase, like for the museum and places. So it's a completely digital platform that you store everything in it, so you can click and move around and do it. It's really excellent. It's an absolutely intriguing technology. It's mind-numbing how much effort you've got to put in to make it go and keep it going. So you should, sometimes hoping for those things can bring pain on the way. So, but that's where the technology of the future is. So just think about what we can actually do now with our technology.
You another question?
You have, yep. With respect to how we account for depreciation, what's on Splash Palace and charging user pays. So does the cost to use also include the depreciation for the things like roofs? Or are we setting that aside from how we charge?
I have to take a pass on that one, but we'll discuss it next week when we bring back aquatics.
Right.
Because that will say, I'm pretty sure it will not be included. That was sort of considered to be the general rates impact, was to provide the building.
Yeah.
The activity within it is cost recovery.
Right.
Okay, Russell, more? That's it? Any further questions before we break for lunch? No? Well, thank you, guys. Appreciate that. And what's coming back again? Sorry, Patricia? You said you're bringing something back?
Next week has aquatics.
Aquatics.
And I'll bring that back with that.
Synchronised swimming.
Not if she has anything to do with it.
Is that with the Right. Thank you. It's time for lunch. You can stop streaming now. Thank you.